On December 7, 1941, the world changed forever. Japanese planes filled the sky over Pearl Harbor, explosions tore through U.S. battleships, and a nation that had tried to stay out of the global conflict was suddenly thrust into World War II. But the question remains, why did Japan do it? Why launch a surprise attack against the world's most industrially powerful nation? Why risk everything on a single strike? The answer is deeper, more complex, and more strategic than many people realize. To understand Japan's decision, we need to rewind decades long before Pearl Harbor to a time when Japan transformed from an isolated island nation into an imperial power seeking recognition, resources, and dominance in Asia. For centuries, Japan had closed itself off from the world. But in the mid-1800s, Western powers forced Japan to open its ports, exposing it to the technological and military superiority of Europe and the United States. This humiliation sparked a national mission: modernize or be dominated. Japan chose to modernize. Within just a few decades, Japan built a powerful navy, an advanced army, and an industrial base that rivaled the West. But it lacked something crucial: natural resources. Japan had almost no oil, very little iron, and limited land for agricultural expansion. For a growing empire, this was a huge problem. Without resources, Japan could not fuel its navy, run its factories, or continue its modernization project. So Japan looked outward. It began expanding into Asia, first with the Sino-Japanese War against China, then the Russo-Japanese War, which shocked the world by ending in Japan's victory. This expansion wasn't just about pride, it was about survival. Japan wanted control over Korea, Manchuria, and later the entire Chinese mainland, because these areas offered raw materials, farmland, and strategic position. By the 1930s, Japan had become deeply militarized. The military gained enormous influence over politics, and nationalist groups championed the idea that Japan had a divine mission to lead Asia. But expansion brought Japan into direct conflict with Western interests, especially the United States. America had strong economic ties to China, controlled the Philippines, and wanted to preserve the balance of power in the Pacific. The more Japan expanded, the more the U.S. felt threatened. Tension built slowly at first, but everything escalated in 1937 when Japan launched a full-scale invasion of China. The conflict became brutal, and reports of atrocities shocked the world. The U.S. condemned Japan's actions and began restricting exports of military materials. But the final breaking point came in 1941, when Japan moved into French Indochina, modern-day Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia to cut off supplies reaching Chinese resistance forces. This was the moment the United States could no longer ignore Japan's expansion. In response, America imposed a series of economic sanctions that hit Japan where it hurt most: its fuel supply. The U.S. froze Japanese assets and, most devastatingly, placed an embargo on oil. Overnight, Japan lost access to nearly 90% of its imported oil. Without oil, its navy would shut down, its planes would be grounded, and its factories would collapse. Japan had two choices: retreat from the territories it had conquered or go to war to seize the resources it needed. For Japan's militaristic leadership, retreat was unthinkable. Losing territory would be seen as weakness. The military believed Japan had come too far to back down, and that surrendering hard-won conquests would destroy national pride and political stability. The only alternative was to secure new resources quickly, and the best place to find them was Southeast Asia, particularly the Dutch East Indies, known today as Indonesia, which was rich in oil and rubber. But invading Southeast Asia created a major problem: the United States Pacific Fleet, based in Pearl Harbor. As long as the American fleet existed, Japan could not expand freely. The fleet could cut off Japan's supply lines, attack its transports, and cripple its operations. So Japan faced a strategic dilemma: either strike first or wait for America to intervene later. Japan's military leaders believed that war with the U.S. was inevitable. If they didn't attack now, the blockade would eventually strangle Japan to death. This is where the idea of Pearl Harbor emerged. The Japanese strategy was built on a single bold assumption that a surprise attack would destroy the American Pacific Fleet long enough for Japan to conquer Southeast Asia, fortify its new territories, and negotiate peace from a position of strength. Japan didn't think it could beat the United States in a long war. It knew America had far more factories, resources, and manpower. But Japan hoped that a short, devastating blow would shock the U.S. into accepting Japan's dominance in Asia. Many people imagine Japan's attack as irrational or reckless, but from Japan's perspective, it was a high-risk, high-reward gamble. Military planners believed they had no other choice. Either they seized the resources they needed or faced economic collapse. Either they neutralized the U.S. fleet or risked having it attack them later. The goal was not to conquer America, it was to disable America long enough to make Japanese expansion permanent. Still, even within Japan, the decision was controversial. Some politicians believed diplomacy might still work. Others warned that the U.S. industrial machine was too big to fight. But the military, especially the Imperial Navy, had immense influence and was convinced that America lacked the will to fight a long war. They believed Americans were comfortable, divided, and unwilling to suffer heavy casualties. They were wrong, but at the time, that belief shaped their decision. As negotiations failed in late 1941, Japan secretly prepared its fleet for the attack. Carriers, battleships, destroyers, and submarines moved quietly across the Pacific, undetected. Meanwhile, diplomats in Washington continued negotiations, even as military orders finalized the attack plan. On December 7, Japan launched its strike. The goal was to sink battleships, destroy aircraft, cripple naval facilities, and buy Japan 6 months of free movement in Asia. But despite the damage inflicted, the attack ultimately failed to achieve its deeper objectives. Japan destroyed battleships, but most of America's aircraft carriers were not in the harbor that day. Fuel depots and repair facilities, which were crucial targets, were left untouched. Most importantly, the attack enraged the American public. Instead of intimidating the United States, Pearl Harbor united it. The sleeping giant was awake. Japan got its 6 months, but those months only allowed the U.S. to industrialize at a pace the world had never seen. American shipyards and factories produced planes, carriers, and weapons faster than Japan could destroy them. Japan's gamble had underestimated the resilience, anger, and economic power of the United States. In the end, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor because it believed it had no other choice. Its empire needed resources, its military demanded expansion, and diplomatic solutions had failed. The oil embargo pushed Japan into a corner. Pearl Harbor was not madness, it was desperation masked as strategy. Understanding this moment in history isn't about assigning absolute blame or excusing aggression. It's about recognizing how nations make catastrophic decisions when pressured by fear, pride, and limited options. Pearl Harbor wasn't an isolated event. It was the culmination of decades of tension, misunderstanding, and competing ambitions. If you want more powerful history breakdowns that go beyond the surface, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and drop your thoughts below. History is full of moments like this, complex, dramatic, and deeply human.